Welcome to the Start Here podcast for web development. I'm Keith Monahan.
And I'm Dane Miller.
And we're here to show you how to build a career in web development. You can find us online at starthere.fm.
Hey Keith, how's your week been?
Hi Dane. Oh, it's going well. Things are exciting at the new company. I've been building websites and having a lot of fun with CSS and HTML, PHP, all that good stuff. What's been really exciting is just the team. I think I mentioned it last week, but I work with a fantastic team, designers and operations people, and copywriters, and really good people. And it's exciting because I didn't used to work in a team environment, and to go from nothing to just great people is pretty awesome.
Yeah, that can be quite a switch. I used to work alone as well. I enjoy having a team there these days. But how do you like the open office layout? I'm assuming you guys are going with the open office.
Yeah. So all of our desks are like in one room, one open space, and it's a lot of fun. Having come on recently, it's really good because I can learn about just the company culture and learn about everyone else, kind of through osmosis, just right as I'm working, and it's good. I like it a lot. Now the flip side is I've noticed that I have a harder time concentrating because I want to, be involved in the conversations and stuff going on around me, but sometimes I feel like I have to put my headphones on, turn the music up, and just head down, dig in. Otherwise, I don't know if I'd get any work done.
Yeah, no, I'm the same way.
What's it like at your space? What's your office space look like?
It's an open office layout as well. So we have different rooms. As you walk down this hallway, we'll have a room for operations, a room that's effectively biz dev and some other roles. And then we have a room that is development. And it's completely open, just a bunch of IKEA desks, no attempt to make a separation between desks. Mm-hmm. The only separation is our monitors, really. So a lot of us have monitors that are about eye level, so it's hard to see ahead of us. But anybody that's to the right or to the left, you can pretty much see at all times. So it can be distracting. And I'm one of those people where if somebody's talking in the room, I'll want to take my headphones off just to listen and sort of see just what's going on, because I'm endlessly curious and fascinated by everything for some reason.
That's funny.
So that's challenging. That's probably the hardest part.
Okay, that's funny because I'm the same way. Maybe it just is because everything is so new right now.
Right.
But I don't know. I find myself doing that all the time too. Yeah.
How are you managing that? Are you just saying I'm not going to get as much done because of this, or?
Well, to a certain extent, yes, because I realize that we are in a team, and I chose web development because it's a safe career, it's good money and all of these things, but the culture is fun, and these people that I work with, I'm living my life with them, and our lives become intertwined, and so they're friends, and so that part of it, a little bit, maybe 5%, I say, I'm just not going to get quite as much work done, but the value to the company culture outweighs that. That 5%. At least that's kind of what I'm thinking right now.
I completely agree. That's a really great way of putting it. I think that the headphones issue leads into a deeper issue of productivity, and a lot of developers face this, right? And a lot of the times a team, I think, works the best when everybody realizes that they don't need to be so serious all the time, that if somebody's trying to get somebody else's attention and maybe make a joke or even do anything, if everybody just sort of winds down for a second and lets that happen and accepts the fact that they won't be as productive for 5 minutes, it instead builds culture, and it does all those things that you said. It builds a team, it builds trust and just fun, right? And I think that is a lot better than just working nonstop like we used to as freelancers.
Yeah, because if you're not having fun, then why are you doing it?
Yeah, exactly.
So it has been a lot of fun. And I've really enjoyed working with the team and the people, and the kind of separate from the team. The other thing I've been dealing with this last week is just I think it's probably just natural for working in the kind of a web shop that I work in is timelines for different projects. I've built 4 or 5 websites now, and only one of them is actually live. And that's because the others are in, various stages, but primarily waiting on other people and mostly waiting on clients to give us content or, approval or something like that. And so it's a little different than I initially thought, because I thought, I'll work on a website and then launch it, and then I'll work on another website. And it's not really like that. It's I'll work on a website until I need approval or I need more information or
until
content.
You're blocked.
Yeah. And then I'll work on a different project, but then I'll come back to it. And I've noticed that if I have to come back to a project and I've been away from it for a little bit, like a week or more, it takes me longer to get, for my mind to get back into that space.
I agree. And the funny thing is, even when I used to work in the government, they had this problem all the time. Is like, we would want to launch these new projects because we were brought in to do nothing but basically launch projects. And it was so difficult to launch. There was all these blockers and just everything blocked everything. And when everything starts to block like that, then nothing gets done and you're just driving yourself crazy. So everybody turns to open source and they're like, well, I'll just start open sourcing stuff. And then it turns into this whole other situation. So I completely understand. I know how it is.
Yeah, it's like a little discouraging.
Yeah.
I think I've just realized that's how it is, and that's how it's going to be.
Sometimes, that's just how it is, unfortunately, dealing with clients. A lot of the times, though, if you work at a product company, which is why I sort of chose to come work at the company that I'm at now, you don't have that problem, right? Because you have your own in-house product, and you are releasing every week or every 2 weeks, and no matter what, you have to hit that. And that's not the same thing as launching a site from start to finish, but it still has that sort of dopamine / fun factor.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, the little releases and stuff.
Yeah.
So we just want to thank everyone for such a warm reception for our first episode. We shared it to our friends and family and online, and we had great feedback, and we just really appreciate that. There was more interest initially than we thought there would be, and that's fantastic. Just to reiterate, we're doing this because we want others to learn web development more quickly and more efficiently than we did. Mm-hmm. And I think Dana and I both have a passion for helping people, and so that's just, that's why we're here. That's what we're here to do.
Yep, totally agree. And we just wanted to point out one of the items of feedback that we got from Charles Sipe. And he said, "Hi, thanks for the excellent podcast. I'm excited for future episodes, and in response to the question posed at the end of the episode, I want to become a web developer because I wanted to work in a field that is respected, interesting, fun, and engaging. I want to be able to positively affect the lives of people and do meaningful work." And that was a really cool comment by Charles, because it is exactly why Keith and I both got into the industry. And I think it is one of those industries that combines all those different avenues and aspects of work. And that was a little bit of a paraphrasing of his comment by me, but you got the gist of it there. And we do appreciate iTunes reviews and emails with constructive criticism, so they don't have to be super positive. Just feel free to communicate with us about what you're liking, what you're not liking. We appreciate it all.
Yeah, definitely. And if you want to shoot us an email with the criticism before you leave a review, that's awesome too.
Yes.
So last episode, we had you go through some resources. One of them was developajob.com, and that was an overview of the industry and the job, and we hope that was informative and helped you kind of get more familiar with the industry. We also had you go through lesson 1 from Shay Howe's website on how to build a website, and we'd love to know how your first website turned out. Did you have fun or did you get frustrated? Did you actually go ahead and go through his project and build the website with him? Mm-hmm. That's important. We think that you need to do more than just read the text, and we want you to get involved. Open your text editor, save the files, go through the motions, because that is the only way to learn this stuff. Mm-hmm. So if you didn't, go ahead and go back and start and do that again, because we are going to continue to use Shay Howe as a resource, because he's laid this out in a really, really excellent way.
Yeah, totally agree. Big fan of his work, and we'll continue using it going forward. So definitely go back and actually commit to doing the items that he outlines, because again, that's the only way you're going to learn. And just to reiterate, through the first lesson there, you should have learned a little bit about HTML and a little bit about CSS. Some of the things you should have learned are elements, tags, attributes in HTML, and then in CSS, you should have learned about selectors, properties, and values. You should at least know what they are. You perhaps don't need to know everything about them. Just a basic familiarity with what they are and how they interact with the other items that you learned as well.
Yeah. So you might be wondering why start with HTML? Web development is big. There's a lot that you can do. And HTML is important because it is the foundation of every web page. And it's basically the first thing that hits your browser. It's the first thing that the user is going to experience. The browser pulls the other content like CSS after it receives the HTML. And so it's important to think about the structure and how it affects the styling, because how you style a website does depend on the structure to begin with. And we won't get into too much or at all really this time, but in later episodes we might talk about how the structure of your website, whether it's logical and hierarchical, can affect your SEO as well. So your search engine optimization, how your website appears in search results. And that's obviously that's really important because you want people to be able to find your websites. Dane, what is HTML? Can you give us kind of an overview of just in general what it is?
Yeah, sure. So HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. And it's basically not, well, first of all, we should mention it's not a programming language. So don't be discouraged, though, by that, because you might come into this wanting to learn a programming language. It's totally fine. Learning this first will serve a lot of value to you. So it's called Hypertext Markup Language. Basically, it adds this structure to the page. It allows you to add content to your website. It doesn't have anything to do with the styling or the paint, the color, anything that you actually see on the site. It just is the structure and the content. And it's usually hierarchical in structure and logically structured. It allows for a hook for your CSS such that you can point CSS at certain HTML elements to then style them. And then also in this context, you should probably be aware of HTML5. HTML5 is just the 5th version of the HTML specification, and the HTML spec is simply a document that defines what HTML is and does on a very, very detailed level. So there, if you think in your head, that makes sense because somewhere that's got to exist, and it does. A organization called the W3C defines these specifications, and that's what we go off of, and that's what the browser creators go off of when they create the ability for the browsers to render those attributes and elements and such. And that may be a little detailed, but that's fine for now. So HTML5 is simply the 5th version of that spec, and when you hear it, just think HTML.
Right, and sometimes when people talk about HTML5, they're referring specifically to the new features that were added compared to HTML4, and just know that you're going to be using pretty much the entire gamut of HTML. Where does HTML live? How do we use HTML, Dane? What's the flow, the experience for that code? Where does it start? Where does it end?
Yeah, so HTML is served it's considered a front-end language. So your back-end languages, as you might have already learned if you've been perusing this topic, back-end languages are like PHP, Python, Ruby, etc. HTML and CSS and JavaScript as well are considered front-end languages. And why are they considered front-end? Because they're all served onto the client's computer and then rendered from there. So they aren't living on a server. So the server is where the back-end actual server side is what you'll usually hear. Languages are written, and that's where the code is stored as well. And the HTML is simply served up from those back-end languages, and then it's put into the browser, which is on the client's computer. And client is another term you'll hear a lot. That just means the user's computer. And then the user's computer, their web browser will render that code. Pretty simple. Mm-hmm. Every web browser or every web developer should learn HTML and CSS, though, as a result of this, even if you are really mainly interested in those backend languages. So this is very common as a theme. You'll hear people that want to jump right into the Python or right into the Ruby because they value that sort of experience more than HTML and CSS. But you have to keep in mind, if you're going to be a web developer, it's really great to know HTML and CSS. Why not do it all, right? I mean, there's no reason you can't learn a little bit about everything and then specialize in something else later down the road.
Mm-hmm. And, chances are, as a web developer, you will have to work with HTML and maybe CSS at some point.
Yep.
And if you're building your programs for the web, it helps to know, kind of how they're going to live and where they're going to live, and that is inside of the HTML. And so it is an important foundation. So yeah, like Daniel, like you were saying, HTML and CSS are technically front-end languages, but we think that every web developer should know these, at least at a foundational level.
Totally agree.
Right. And as you get into it, it gets you familiar with kind of the environment of a text editor and working with code. And HTML and CSS are easier because they're not full programming languages. They're easier to get in and understand and use than a full programming language. And so it'll kind of give you a head start. The other thing is it helps you understand the documentation.
Mm-hmm.
As you get in, you learn how to read the specs for HTML and CSS. That'll get you familiar with the docs, which you will be able, and you'll end up doing that as well with other programming languages.
Yeah. And as we already mentioned, we're already talking about things like the client and the server. Just learning those topics, even just at a very cursory level, you're already learning about the introduction topics to computer programming. So it's like, okay, well, you're learning beneficial stuff, even if you do want to specialize in Python. So it's totally, totally cool. And Keith, why don't you just outline what the popular browsers are and some of our, then we'll go into our favorites.
Yeah. So we talked about the front end versus the back end and the client, and the client is the browser. That's what your computer uses to read HTML and CSS. And there's a number of different types of browsers. You've probably heard of Google Chrome and Mozilla Firefox and Safari, which is made by Apple, and Internet Explorer, which comes from Microsoft. And those are kind of the big four. They all have advantages and disadvantages. And as a web developer, at least for the front end, it's our responsibility to make sure that our websites and our programs, that they work well in all the different major browsers to a point. And that's a discussion for another day. It's about compatibility, and it can get complicated, but it's important to know that you'll need to do that to think about the different browsers.
Yeah, totally. So what would be your favorite browser if you had to name one?
I use Google Chrome pretty much exclusively for development, and that's because their development tools in the browser are fantastic for debugging HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and honestly, I use a lot of the Google services like Gmail and Google Drive and these things, and those integrate really well inside the browser as well. And so it's just kind of a nice experience for me. What's your favorite browser?
Definitely Google Chrome. So I use Google Chrome a lot for web development, specifically because of the developer tools, like you said. So you'll right-click and inspect an element. You can debug your HTML box model problems and your CSS and your JavaScript all right there, and it's really great. Firefox does have Firebug, which a lot of people have been adamant about in the past. I'm not really sure what the use case is like nowadays, but I still use Firefox sometimes when I don't want Google Chrome to take up all the memory on my computer.
Oh, right. So you're getting at the idea that each tab you open in Google Chrome is a new process on your computer. So it's like opening another instance. It is opening another instance of that application.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, that can be. If you have tons of tabs open in Chrome, that can definitely slow your system down.
Yeah, but it's sometimes very useful. So if I'm doing a lot of really crazy JavaScript stuff, I'll use Chrome, because if the JavaScript is going to run into like an infinite loop or something and crash, I want it to just crash that one tab and not the whole browser. Right.
Yeah, and that's the benefit of sandboxing those tabs into different processes, is so that you don't lose all of your stuff.
Yep.
That you might be working on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's I definitely like that about Google Chrome.
Mm-hmm.
When writing HTML, what do we have to think about, Dane? Like what? How do you go about that?
I really like to think about logical structure when writing HTML. The most important thing, I believe, is a left to right structure. So when you're writing it and you're visualizing what elements on the page go where, and then you're thinking, how can I interpret that into code? Just look at the mock-up that you have. I mean, I assume you have some sort of mock-up or some image in your mind of what you want to write as far as HTML. So think about it, and then from left to right, top to bottom, usually you want to write your HTML like that. So if it's a nav bar, and then below the nav bar you have some other content, you want to write the nav bar in its entirety first. And then below that, you want to write the content that is there. And you usually want to follow that sort of paradigm. It creates sort of a hierarchical structure throughout your HTML document that is very easy to understand, and also greatly helps with CSS, because you have to keep in mind CSS is going to style the element that you target, but it's also going to affect the elements that are adjacent to that element typically. So you want to keep that in mind.
Right. Yeah. And so there's another reason why it's important to write HTML in a logical, structured way, and that's for people that can't see your website, and for machines as well. And so maybe if there's somebody who's blind who's trying to access your website, if your content isn't logical on the page and it jumps around a bunch, they have a screen reader that might be literally reading the page content back to you from the HTML. They don't have the experience of the CSS or spitting out the text to one of those readers that they can feel. I don't know what that's called. And so it has to make sense for them too. And that's why it's important to look at the HTML, at the very least look at the HTML, make sure it makes sense without your CSS.
Yep.
And you never know, like I was saying, machines, there are like little spider programs that crawl the web. And Google does this for their search engines. It crawls the web and literally reads your web page. And it's kind of scary how content aware Google is becoming. They understand context. And so for search engine optimization, we're coming back to that term, the structure of your site is important as well.
Exactly. And you'll hear these terms used a lot. So for people that are disabled and they're reading and stuff like that, the term that you'll hear a lot is accessibility. So you want to think about how to make things accessible to other people that might be disabled in some way, or whatever the politically correct term is. But you also will hear 501 compliance sometimes, which is simply the same thing, but usually with stricter mandates.
Right. I think so the government has very strict mandates about accessibility.
Yeah.
So talking about structure versus presentation, when you write your HTML, you want to make sure that it is just the structure and you're not including, presentational elements in there. Mm-hmm. And to kind of take a step back, when you're working with CSS, there's basically three ways that you can style your website. You can include that CSS in your HTML, and one of them is you could write it inline, literally inside the tag for your element there. You could write the CSS at the top of your page, the top of your HTML document, or you can write it in a separate file that's a .css file, and then just link it to your HTML. And by far the most common way to write is to include that CSS file separately than your HTML.
Yep.
It's a separation of your structure and presentation, and that's a good standard. And it can be tempting to write your styling inside of your HTML because it's so easy to do, but we would encourage you to get used to the idea of having them separate.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's a huge point that a lot of people, when they're writing HTML for the first time, they will put the CSS in line in the HTML simply because it's easier. And I totally understand that, and sometimes I'll even promote that as a way to learn about the box model. But go ahead and start getting into the habit of separating those concerns. It's going to be very beneficial later when you're learning about actual programming languages. All programming languages a lot of programming paradigms these days are based around separation of concerns. So thinking about what unit of work this section of code can do. This is a very common theme. So getting into this mind state now is just going to benefit you later. Mm-hmm. And that's a sort of a point that we're trying to make when teaching you these things. A lot of the time you'll be listening and you'll probably wonder why not just teach you the easiest way to do something. It's because that's how we learned, and then we had to learn it the right way the second time. So you learn it the easy way the first time and then the right way the second time. We want to avoid that and just teach you the right way the first time, even though it might be a little bit more challenging. The point is you'll be ahead of 90% of the people that are in your exact position learning this stuff. And that's the whole point.
Right, exactly. And maybe one example is building websites so they're responsive instead of fixed.
Exactly. That's a perfect point.
Yep. And if you don't know what that is, you can do a Google search and we'll cover that later on as well.
Yeah, we'll definitely have almost an entire episode on that.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So the resources for today are to continue learning with Shay Howe, lesson number 2. And his website is learn.shayhowe.com, and Shay Howe is ShayHowe. And that's lesson 2, getting to know HTML. It's going to dive deeper into more concepts of HTML, some of the page structure, how to think about laying out a page with different sections. And so dig into that and let us know how it goes. We want to hear from you. Hit us up on our website. You can find the show notes for this episode at starthere.fm/webdev/2 for episode 2, and leave us a comment there. You can also find me on Twitter at Keith Mon. That's KeithMon.
Yeah, and I'm on Twitter at Dane Miller. So that's DainMiller.
Excellent. So thanks for listening, guys. We really appreciate it. Have a great week.
Bye.